Good afternoon, class. I'm Dr. Yap. I'm going to be the second lecturer for this particular course. Right, so as you have been briefed before, I believe, there's going to be 3 lecturers for this particular course. So I'm going to be the second lecturer. So I'll bring you through this digital camera, camcorder, as well as the home entertainment system. Okay. So here are my contact information. So should you have any question regarding my part of the course, you're welcome to drop me an email to arrange an appointment for discussion. Okay, so, let's again set it down. Right, okay, so the first topic that I'm going to cover is digital camera. Right, so this is the course outline for my part of the content. So the part 1 that I'm going to cover, I'm going to talk about digital camera as well as the camcorder. So some of the things I'll be talking about will be the structures of digital camera, okay, some basic techniques about photography and how to edit some images. Right, we'll also briefly touch on JPEG, which is a very well-known image compression standard. We'll see what's the main idea behind this JPEG image compression standards. Okay, and then later on, we'll touch on this video camcorder and compare with these 2 devices between camera and camcorder. Okay. Right, okay, for second part, we'll be looking at this home entertainment system. So particularly, we'll be looking at home theater, right, some of the gaming console, including Xbox, PS3, or now PS4, right, as well as we'll be looking at one video compression standard known as MPEG. Right, so that's the overview of my part of the course. Right, so for this part of the course on digital camera, these are some of the references. Right, I believe you should be able to get plenty of materials or information regarding photography, digital cameras, and so on and so forth. You just need to go to Google. You should be able to find out plenty of information. But here, anyway, I include some of the information, references, should you want to use them to further your understanding. Right, okay, can you set it down, please? Right, okay, so this is a pretty standard slides that I have. Most of the contents some of the contents in this particular slides are copyrighted by respective publishers or authors. Right, so you should only use it for your own studies. Right, okay. So next, we'll be looking at digital camera. So under the sections of this digital camera, we'll be looking at the following topics. So first of all, we'll be looking at digital imaging. Right? And then we'll look at the camera and see what are the components inside cameras and what are their functionality, how they work, and so on. So pretty much we'll be looking at the structures and the concepts. We'll be looking at some of the features and functionalities of digital camera. Okay, and then some photography tips, right? How do you perform some image editing? And finally, we'll introduce one image compression standard known as JPEG. Right, okay, so first, let's try to give you a quick introduction about digital imaging. Right, so all of us know that digital image is an important medium for you to store the information, to present the information, and for even interactions. Right, so pretty much an image, what's an image? Anyone know what's an image? I mean, many of you deal with image day in, day out, but what's an image? Image is nothing but a 2-dimensional array or matrix of pixels. Right, so simply put, image consists of a 2-dimensional array of elements. And this basic element is known as pixel. So when you go to buy a TV, accompany your parents to go and buy a TV, often the salesperson will tell you, oh no, this particular camera or this TV has what kind of resolution, how many megapixels, and so on and so forth. So this is the pixel they are referring to. Okay, so an image consists of a 2-dimensional array of basic elements. So each of these elements here inside is known as pixel. right? Pixel stands for picture element, okay? So simply put, image is just simply that, right? A matrix consists of rows and columns of picture elements here. Right, okay, so this, can you set it down, please? Right, okay. So it says that here an image is made up of pixels, the smallest image resolution element, which is what I've shown you before. So there's a few popular image formats such as the JPEG. Probably many of you have heard of this. JPEG stands for Joint Photographic Expert Group. Right, it's a particular image format. It's also an image compression standard. Right, we know that for an image, right, you can see an image is like this. Right, nowadays with the cameras, you can easily get 10 megapixels of elements like this. So an image, if you do not compress it, will have a very large storage requirement. That's why when you're dealing with media such as image and video, often you need to compress. You need to perform the compression. Okay, so JPEG is one way for you to perform the compression. That's why most of the images nowadays, you see, actually is compressed in this format, JPEG. Okay, there's also other format for image, right? Another one relatively popular is known as TIFF. TIFF is usually used if you are in publishing, right? Publication. Usually you need a high quality image, you'll be using TIFF, right? And then bitmap. So these are some of the standard or popular image formats. Okay, so earlier on I've actually introduced the concepts of pixels already. So from this diagram you can see, right, this is a particular image here. Okay, so in an image, one of the common concepts that's involved, of course, one is pixel. Okay, pixel, as I mentioned to you, is a picture element. It's the smallest elements that you have in an image, just like this here. Okay, and the common concept that's associated with image is resolution. Right, so how many of you have heard of this term, image resolution, TV resolutions, or even monitor resolution? Anyone? I believe most of you should have heard of this word, resolution. But what is the meaning of resolution? Resolution, I think most of you will probably have a feel about this term resolution. But this term resolution can be put into slightly different contexts. Right? For example, if you go and print out a poster, right, a poster or a photo, a hard copy photo, when you talk about resolution, usually under that context, the resolution usually you'll be referring to will be this pixels per inch, PPI. Okay? If you are trying to talk about, for example, camera, when you're buying a camera, they tell you this camera has 5 megapixels of resolution. What it means is the total number of pixels in the particular image is 5 megapixels. 5 times 1024 times 1024. Okay? So that is, if you are talking about the context of, for example, camera or TV, the resolution actually in that case will refer to the total pixel count. Okay? Sometimes when you are talking about resolution, for example, the monitor, or you'll be talking in terms of width multiplied by height. Okay? How many pixels across and how many pixels down. So in short, pixel is nothing but the total number of pixels in a particular image. Okay, that's a resolution. And there's a few ways you can express it, as I mentioned, depending on different contexts. Okay, it can either be shown as, okay, total pixel count, width by height, or the pixel per image, depending on different application and context. Right, so for example, you can say a resolution is about 5 megapixel. Okay, that means in this particular image, altogether you have 5 times 10 to the power 6 this kind of elements in the image. Okay, you can talk about 640 by 480, 640 across, and 480 down, right, pixels. Or if you are talking about a poster that you print out or a hard copy photo, you can have things like 300 pixels in an inch, right? So, but all in all, this concept of resolution is closely tied to how much detail you can show in a particular image. So typically, higher resolution means that you can pack in more pixels in an image. That means you'll be able to offer finer detail. So generally speaking, what you hear outside is true. The higher the resolution, the better is an image, right? Okay. So that's why it says here, resolution is the ability to distinguish fine details of an image. Because given an image, if you really zoom in, you can see that this image consists of nothing but rows and columns of small square here. And this square is nothing but pixel. Okay. Right. So for this particular lecture, essentially what we're trying to do is just trying to give you some quick introductions of some of the basic concepts in image processing as well as digital camera. Right, so an important concept in image representation is known as bit depth or color depth. Right, so now that you have understood that an image is nothing but a matrix or two-dimensional array of pixels. Now the next question is that how many bits can I use to represent this image? Okay, because nowadays we know that when we talk about pictures, we are talking about digital image. So for digital image, you'll be representing it with a certain number of bits. So how many bits you use to represent each pixel is referred to as the bit depth or the color depth, right? So bit depth or the color depth is nothing but the number of pixels used to represent each pixel. Okay, so for images, essentially, there's three common types of images, right? The first one is binary image. So as the name suggests, binary means 0 or 1. That means white or black, white or black. So for binary images like this, how many pixels, how many bits do you need to represent it? For binary image, you only have two possible levels. It's either black or white. So with two levels, how many bits do you need to represent it? 1 bit, right? So it's quite straightforward. Therefore, for binary image like this, okay, you only require 1 bit to represent them for each pixel. For each pixel. Of course, I'm referring to each pixel. Right. Next, for grayscale image like this, grayscale is like the photos that your grandparents take, those old-time kind of grayscale, gray color images. So for gray color images, essentially, grayscale images, you can use different number of bits to represent it. Suppose if you're using 8 bits to represent each pixel, how many different kind of a tone or level can it represent? Suppose you're using 8 bits to represent each pixel in a grayscale image. How many different levels can you represent? Up to how many different levels? Yes? It's 2 to the power of 8, huh? So 2 to the power of 8 will be 256. So if you use 8 bits to represent each pixel in a grayscale image, you have 256 different tone or level of representation. Right, next, color image. For most of you, you're familiar with color image. So a color image actually is something similar to this as well. Okay, however, for color image, we need to tell you that color image is usually represented again as a two-dimensional array of pixels like this, except in this case, for color image, instead of 1 channel, you have 3 channels. So for binary or grayscale, you only have 1 channel. But for color image, you have 3 channel or 3 plane. Okay, so for color image, you will have 3 channel or 3 planes here. Okay, therefore, when you are talking about a color image, okay, for color image, when you are talking about one particular pixel, is represented by how many different values? For color image, if you are talking about 1 pixel, how many values are you referring to? 3 different values, huh? Okay, represented by these 3 different planes or channels. And one of the common way to describe this color image is what is known as RGB color model. Right, so in short, an image is nothing but a two-dimensional array of pixels. And for color image, you have 3 channels, red, green, and blue. Red, green, and blue. So when you're referring to about any specific pixels here, essentially it consists of a triplet of value, red, green, and blue. So from now onwards, you know that for color image, it has 3 channels, right? Okay, and one common way of representing is RGB. That means there are 3 channels, red, green, and blue. Okay, suppose now for each red, green, and blue, okay, in this pixel, if I use 8 bits to represent this red channel, 8 bits to represent this green channel, 8 bits represent this blue channel, then how many bits am I using to represent a pixel? Will be 24, right? So for 24, how many different tones can it represent? Will be 2 to the power of 24. Huh? So therefore, for color images like this, if you are using up to 24 bits to represent it, that means you have 2 to the power of 24. You'll be able to represent up to 16.7 different million different tone or levels. Okay, so for your information, our eyes can easily differentiate up to about 10 million different colors. Okay. So earlier on, I have just explained to you that a color image can be represented as 3 different channel or plane. Okay, channel or plane. So there's different ways you can describe this color, right? There's many different what we know as a color model or color space to describe the color. Among them, one of the most popular one is known as RGB color space. Okay, this RGB color space is just one way to describe a color image. In short, there's many different ways you can describe a color image. One of the common one is RGB. Okay, so which is shown here. Right, so the color image can be expressed using different color space. You may ask, why do you want to have different color space to represent a color image? Okay, the answer is, no, different color space sometimes has different properties and advantages when you try to represent it. For example, one of the color space that you have, YCBCR, which is using either JPEG or MPEG, right? You can make use of that to help you to perform compression. Okay, so in short, color space are just different way of describing color images. And among them, RGB is one of the most common ones. So these are some examples of color spaces. Okay, so for RGB, each pixel is represented as a triplet of red, green, and blue, right? Okay, so this is the figure that shows this additive color scheme. I believe for most of you in secondary school, you have studied this before. So also, you can easily visualize this particular RGB color space using this color cube here. So if you look at this color cube here, this is the red axis, green axis, and the blue axis here. So the blue, green, blue, red, and green, each one has a big value 1 here, and 1 here. So this is a color cube. So if you try to move along this particular diagonal line, okay, this is a gray level here. This is a gray level. This point will correspond to black, and this point that has a value of 111 will correspond to white color. Okay. Right, so these slides here show you an example of RGB color image. So, for example, given a 24 bits color images, right, so for color image, you have 3 channels, right? And if each, so we say each color pixel has 3 components, the red, green, and blue. If you use 8 bits for each component, so altogether, you're going to have 24 bits. And for each component, right, for each of red, green, blue, if you use 8 bits to represent, that means you can have up to 256 different tones. Yeah, so the value can be from 0 to 255. So, right, for your information, right, a triplet values of 0, 0, 0, that means red is 0, green is 0, and blue is 0. This will give you a black color, okay? And the white color will correspond to 255, 255, 255, okay? So typically, when you see a color image, it's like this. But underneath this color image, you should know that there's actually 3 separate channels, okay? So you can actually separate them out into the red channel, and the green channel, and the blue channel. So for example, if you refer to this red channel here, you can see this area that corresponds to this red colors here is bright. Okay? In this kind of representation, bright means having a large value. Dark means having a small value. So this area is bright, that means the value is large. That means the red channel here in this region, its value is large. Okay? That means there's a large red color component. Okay, so here I also include a slides about color space. This color space, as I mentioned to you, there's many different ways you can describe a color image, right? each has its own advantages and disadvantages, right? Later on, when we go further down to the course, I'll probably introduce some of the color space to you in greater details. But essentially here, I'm just trying to show you that there's many different ways you can represent a color image. RGB is one. Okay, for example, cyan, magenta, yellow, black is another one. Okay, HSI, hue, saturation, intensity is another one. Each of these color space, some has its own advantages and disadvantages that we can make use of under different situations. Right, okay, I believe for some of you, you probably know that about this Kodak moment, right? Any one of you know that 2 years ago, actually this Kodak went bust? Any one of you? Right, probably as your kid, you play with this Kodak camera, huh? As I was a kid. But 2 years ago, in January 2012, actually Kodak, right, Eastman Kodak company, they went into receivership because somehow they cannot catch up with the technology. One of the miscalculations that they have made is that they have not catch up with digital photography as fast as their competitors. So they still focus on the film and the camera that they have, because in the past, these films is a big revenue for them. So they over-rely on this, and they're slow to catch up with digital photography and digital camera. That's why, progressively they have been beaten by their competitors, and they have to go bust later. Right, so with that, now I'm trying to tell you a little bit more about the comparison between digital camera and film camera. Okay? So just now we have mentioned that, digital camera actually possess many advantages over film-based camera. So we can look at some of the advantages of this digital camera over film-based camera. So some of them including, for example, for digital camera, you just imagine the digital camera that you're using today compared to the old camera that I'm not sure whether you have used it before, but probably your parents have used it. Just kind of compare them and then do some visualization. Probably you can come out with the differences and the advantages of digital camera over film camera. So first thing is that it provides more imaging control. Okay, for example, nowadays many of you, if you use Instagram or many image sharing software, you can easily apply different effects, right, to these images before you publish or share with the others. So for digital camera or digital images, you can easily do that. So you have a lot more imaging control. You can also perform zooming, increase the brightness of the image, a lot of these things easily. So therefore, for digital camera, you have such advantages. More imaging control. Okay, easier to share photo. I think many of you know. You just use the image, capture an image, and then you send it to your friend. So with digital camera, you can do that, but not with old film-based camera. Okay, better representation. Okay, more convenient to store, right? With digital images, you can easily store it into a thumb drive, right? But for film camera, you probably need to have a photo album. Okay, you can also edit and apply effect much easier to digital images. Okay, so the next thing is that we are going to look at the digital camera. I'm going to give you a quick introduction of some of the basic structures as well as the concepts for digital camera. Right, okay, so for this part, I'll first of all play a short video so that you can view it, and because sometimes it's easier to understand if you can see it in action. Huh? Let me just try out to see whether.
This program contains experiments which are performed by professionals. These tests are dangerous and may involve the use of hazardous materials. They should not be performed or imitated under any circumstances. It's all about light. The digital camera. It's revolutionized photography by transforming light into electricity. Everything is there to draw in light, from the camera's buttons, controls, and dials down to the lenses. What the digital camera does with light is what makes it so revolutionary. It turns light into electrical charges that become the image captured on the screen. Light particles, or photons, leave the source, bounce off a subject, and enter the camera through a series of lenses. The photons then follow a designated path on their way from photon to photo. A series of lenses allows the photographer to capture the clearest image possible. This lens diaphragm is what controls the amount of light that the photographer allows in through the camera's opening or aperture. After crossing the diaphragm, the lenses, and entering the aperture, the light bounces off a mirror and heads for the viewfinder. Before it gets there, the light is flipped over as it passes through a prism. That's so the image seen in the viewfinder is right side up. If the photographer likes the image, time to press the shutter button. The mirror lifts and the light rushes in. For a fraction of a second, the light is not heading in the direction of the viewfinder, but for the very heart of the digital camera, the image sensor. The duration of this fraction of a second depends on the shutter. That opens just long enough to expose the sensor to light. Now, to the real heart of this digital revolution, the element that captures the image sensor. A tightly structured grid made up of extremely tiny light sensors. When the photons hit the light sensor, they are absorbed by the semiconductor material it's made of. For each photon absorbed, the light sensor emits an electric particle called an electron. The photon's energy transfers to the electron. That's the electrical charge. The brighter the image, the stronger the electrical charge is. So each electrical charge has a different intensity. A circuit board then converts the different intensities into computer language. They represent millions of tiny colored dots that make up a photo. The pixels. The more pixels in a picture, the better the resolution.
Okay. All right, just as a test, I just want to check how many of you have managed to identify the component in the digital camera. So can any one of you tell me from this particular video what are the components that have been explained in this for this digital camera? Anyone? Right, just now they list out a lot of the components in the digital camera. So can any one of you give me at least a few? Okay, shutter, right? Okay, so shutter is pretty much most of the time the camera is open, is closed. So when you want to take a picture, the shutter will be open, so to expose this light to the image sensor. Okay, any other shutter? Okay, you just repeat what I say. Image sensor. Any others? Image sensor is the sensor at the back that actually once the photo come in, the light come in the form of a photon, it will convert it into an electric charge, and this electric charge will then be later on converted into a digital format by using an analog to digital conversion. Okay, any others? All right, so we have two: shutter, image sensor. Just want to check any one of you are paying attention early on. There are actually a lot more. Sorry? I didn't quite hear it. Sorry, I didn't quite hear. Any others? Lens. Okay, lens. Right. Okay, lens is to focus the light so that you can focus the picture properly, so to make it sharp. Okay, lens. Any others? Just now, do you see something that it kind of open up and close? What is that? Okay, it's the aperture, huh? All right, okay, the aperture setting. Any others? Mirror. Okay, for high-end kind of DSLR, you do have the mirror. Okay. Prism. Okay, more or less. Yeah. Okay. Right, okay, I think at least you have spent some time to think about what you have watched. So later on, for the subsequent slides, we are going to cover each of those components a little bit more in detail and explain exactly how it works, okay, and contribute towards the whole operations of a digital camera. Right, okay, so this particular slide gives you a quick overview of a digital camera and its structure. So you can see that for camera, what you have is that, right, first of all, you have the imaging scene. This imaging scene will go through a zoom lens, will go through a lens, okay, so the light will be focused, all right? So they can focus it, right, okay, and then afterwards, you have this aperture and shutter here, right? So as I mentioned, this aperture is, you control how much light will get into the camera, and this shutter, most of the time is open, but when you take a picture, it'll be, most of the time it'll be closed, but when you take a picture, it'll be open for a short instance so that the light can go in and hit the image sensor. Okay, and then afterwards, right, you have this anti-aliasing filter, right? So this is to, most of the time, this thing is to filter away the high frequency component to avoid this kind of ragged edges, right? And then you'll really go through a particular component called a color filter array. Okay, that one we'll talk a little bit more about it later, and then followed by the image sensor. Okay, so once this image sensor, when the light hit on the image sensor, it will produce electric charge. This electric charge often is an analog value, so you need to convert it into a digital value. That's why you have an analog to digital converter. Okay, so all this operation is handled by a camera application-specific IC. So you have a chip that handles all this imaging functionality. Okay, so these chips will handle all this operation. It can store the image onto a memory card if necessary. Okay, it can display the image onto an LCD screen, the view that you have, right? Okay, and for most camera, actually you have a microprocessor, which is like the brain that manages all the operation. Okay, so you have a microprocessor here, right? This microprocessor, right, can interact with this particular IC chip, all right? Okay, it can deal with the memory, the DRAM buffer, okay, the firmware memory. Okay, it can manage. This microprocessor can handle the power supply issue. Okay, it can manage the flash, user control, even the zooming operations, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this particular slide gives you a general overview of a digital camera. Right. Okay, the next slide, this slide here actually shows you the signal processing that's behind the operation. So for the signal processing, what you have is that, first of all, you have an imaging scene that you would like to capture, right? So you have used this lens to focus the light. So this lens then now will be hitting on this particular image sensor. So you can see CCD is one type of the sensor array. Okay, currently there's two popular types. One's a CCD, the other is a, anyone know what is that? CCD. If you go and buy a camera, they'll tell you this sensor is either based on CCD or CMOS. These are the two popular ones. Okay, so essentially this is one type of the image sensor. So this light hit on this image sensor, right? The photon from the light will be converted to electric charges, which is analog in value. So you need to let it go through an analog to digital converter to become a binary value. Right, once you have the binary values, sometimes, if you want, you can store the image at this juncture into a raw format. All right, for some people, they prefer to deal with this raw format, especially those who are more professional, who know how to manipulate images. But that, we'll touch on it later. So some of this, we'll leave it to a little bit later. Here, I'm just trying to give you a quick overview. Okay, so for this image that you capture, you can imagine that this image that you have, sometimes the quality is not so good yet, right? So you need to let it go through a series of the image processing operation, what is known as an image processing engine, to further improve the quality of the images. So under this image processing engine, there's a couple of steps, right? For example, productions of the RGB images, right? Okay, if you let it go through a color filter array, as you will see a bit later, right, you will need to reconstruct the full color image. I will show you or explain a bit later. Right, you need to adjust the brightness. Sometimes it's too dark. You can improve the darkness. You can do this white contrast. Right. Sometimes when the image you capture, even the white object, if you capture under different lighting conditions, it may not appear to be exactly white. Okay, so you need to do some operation to make sure the white object will appear to be white. So this particular process is known as white balancing. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about it. Okay, you need to improve the sharpness. Sometimes you have a motion, right? Then it will be blur. So you can actually, if you want, you can improve the sharpness, right? You can improve the contrast, okay? So that it will look a lot more lively, right? So after you have gone through all these steps, right? Okay, to improve the quality of the image, then this image, you can let it go through a compression standard and store into memory. So this compression technique could be, for example, JPEG that I've highlighted to you, or you can save it as a TIFF format, okay, into a memory card. There's different format you can choose. Right, okay, so the next thing is that what are the factors that will affect the qualities of the images that you capture? Pretty much, okay, there's actually many factors that will affect the performance, okay, or the qualities of the digital image, but mainly three of the important ones is lens, right, the quality of the lens. So that's why you see, sometimes you hear that the lens itself can cost a few $100s, okay? Right, so the lens will affect the performance of the quality of the image you capture. The CCD, this sensor array here, right? Typically, if you have more pixels in the CCD array, the quality tends to be higher because its resolution is higher, okay? And then the image processing engine, right, this part here. Right, for this part here, sometimes it's proprietary. For example, different camera, Sony, Samsung, what's that? Yeah, different camera, they have different image processing engine. That's why you see that sometimes the image capture will look a little bit different, okay? So these three factors will affect the qualities of a digital image. Okay, so next we'll look at some of the important components in digital camera. So from the previous slide, as well as a video, probably you already have some idea about some of the components in digital camera. So some of the common components include, for example, microprocessor. So this is like the brain that coordinates all the operations. Okay, the sensor is sometimes it's known also as a sensor array. You can call it sensor, image sensor, sensor array. They all refer to the same thing. All right? Okay, the shutter, just now we mentioned before, aperture, lens, storage device, all right, batteries, connectivity. So these are the all core components in a digital camera. Right, so next we are going to look at each of these components one at a time, right, and then I'm going to give you a little bit more information about each of the components. Right, the first one is microprocessor. So we know that microprocessor is like the brain that coordinates most of the operation, the general operations of a camera. So some of the operations that is provided by these microprocessors are listed here. Okay, this is actually there's more, but these are just some of the selected functionality offered by microprocessor. So include data acquisition from sensor, okay, image display onto the LCD screen, right? Okay, image processing and storing, for example, the compression. Okay, the overall camera management. Okay, for example, whether you want to zoom in, zoom out, you want to interface with PC and so on. Right, okay, general purpose I/O, for example, if you want to transfer the image to a computer, okay, and so on and so forth, all right, general purpose input-output function, data communication, communication with PC or other devices. Okay, control user function, for example, you want to zoom in, you want to apply different settings and so on. Okay, on-screen display to the LCD screen, communication with PC and others. So you can see microprocessor manage many different operations or functionalities. Right, the next one is image sensor or sensor array. So earlier on from the particular video, you see that once the lights comes in, all right, okay, so it's going to, when the shutter open, the lights is going to come in, it's going to impinge on this image sensor here. So once the light hit the image sensor for a short fraction of time, this light, okay, in the forms of photon is going to, this image sensor is going to convert this light into electric charges. Okay, so if the particular pixel from the imaging scene is bright, that means the charge, okay, is going to be large. Okay, for the particular corresponding pixel from the imaging scene, if it's dark, then the electric charge is going to be small. So all this information will be captured by this particular image sensor, and this image sensor is electric charges that will then later on be converted into a digital value using analog to digital converter. Right, okay, so a little bit more about this sensor array or image sensor. So some of the issues under this sensor array or image sensor include, right, okay, CMOS or CCD sensor array. These are the two common current technology for the image sensor. Okay, the concepts of color filter array. Okay, what's the concepts of image? What do you mean by image demosaicing? Right, okay, resolution and ISO sensitivity under this sensor array. So we'll go to each of them one at a time. So pretty much currently there's two main types of sensor technology. One is known as a CCD. It also stands for charge coupled device. Okay, the other is CMOS, which is complementary metal oxide semiconductor. Right, so these are the two popular technology currently. Right, actually the progress of technology on these two different types of sensor is very fast. So here I try to summarize some of the advantages as well as the advantages of two different types of sensor array. But actually things move so quickly. Some of the things that I put up, 2 years ago may not be valid anymore. So take it with a pinch of salt. Right, okay. So typically for most people, they will consider the advantages of CCD sensor array is that it's more sensitive, right? Because it's more sensitive to light, therefore you can take images when it's even dark, all right? Okay, so in a dark setting, even a little bit of light is able to generate enough charge, okay? So this is considered as one of the advantages of CCD, more sensitive, so you can take image when it's dark. Okay, the image also tends to be cleaner. That means you don't have that much noise or grainy kind of detail. Usually it means the quality of image is a bit better. Right, whereas for CMOS, the advantages commonly is that it consumes less power, okay, and it tends to be cheaper. Right, but as I told you before, the technology actually progressed so fast that what is listed here may not be true, like in 1 or 2 years' time. Okay, so next we are going to look at how exactly is the image being formed on the sensor. Even though just now early on we say that, okay, now what happened when you use a digital camera to capture image is the light come through, right, pass through the shutter, right, and then afterwards will hit the sensor array. But actually, in between, there's a little bit more operation happening. So this is the part we are going to explain a little bit more in detail. So the image formation process. So, okay, right. So under this, we'll be covering a few things. We'll look at some of them a little bit later. So image capturing through color filter array. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about this color filter array, what it is exactly. Okay, and afterwards, once you have the image, you need to perform color recovery, adjustment, for example, including white balancing, color correction, those things we have mentioned before. And then you can also do some post-processing to remove some noise or to sharpen the images. Right, so these are the issues involved in image formation. So the first one we are going to talk about is the color filter array. Okay, color filter array. So any one of you have heard of this term, color filter array? Anyone? Okay, so you can see that color filter array, for many of the current camera nowadays, actually nowadays, most of the digital camera that you have only have one image sensor. Okay, so here what I'm trying to explain to you is why is that a need to use this color filter array? What's the motivation of introducing and using a color filter array? Right. As I mentioned, nowadays, most of the digital camera, right, only have one image sensor. Okay, you only have one image sensor here. Whereas we know that for a color image like this, you have 3 channels, RGB, 3 different channels. Now you have a question, right? So one, this image sensor, okay, image sensor will have many different kind of sensors that correspond to different pixels. But for each of the pixel, right, you need to capture information from the color image. But the information from this color image has 3 channels, red, green, and blue. So now the question is that which channel of information should I capture? Right? Because ideally, if you want to capture all the information of a color image, you need to have you should have 3 different image sensor. But if you have 3 image sensor, it's going to be, why is it that you don't use 3 image sensor? Expensive, yeah. Actually, nowadays you have some high-end digital camera that have, they call 3 CMOS or 3 CCD. Those are the camera that has 3 image sensor. Each image sensor will capture different channels of the information. But for most of the digital camera nowadays, you only have 1 image sensor. The reason why you only have 1 image sensor is because it's cheaper. All right? But you still encounter the problem. If you have only 1 image sensor, you have 3 channels of information. So which one should you capture? So that's why you are in a dilemma. In order to address this problem, that, okay, given a color image, you have these 3 channels of information, whereas, right, this particular sensor that you have, image sensor that you have is only 1. So how do you reconcile this? How do you solve this problem? So how they solve the problems for this, for people in the industry is they introduce this concept called color filter array. So this color filter array is a structure that looks like this, right? You can see it consists of different color filter, red, green, and blue. Okay, red, green, and blue here, right? Okay, so let's look at the explanation first. It says that most digital camera use only a single sensor, okay, to reduce the cost and the size, right? Okay. However, as I mentioned before, for color image, for each pixel, you need to capture 3 channels of information, which you cannot capture using only 1 sensor. That's why you need to use a CFA. So CFA is used to ensure that for each pixel location, only 1 color is sampled. Okay, so how does it work? So what happens is that, for example, you have this particular image sense here. It's going to pass through this color filter array. Right? For example, this pixel location, if it's aligned with this red pixel here, this green filter here, then only the green component of the light will be able to pass through and hit the image sensor. Next, suppose you have a next pixel somewhere here. Okay, it will pass through this green, red filter. Okay, if it pass through this red filter only allows the red component of the light to go through, so that this red component will be able to hit on the image sensor and you capture the red component of the information. That means with the introductions of this color filter array, for each pixel, you will only be capturing 1 color information instead of 3. Okay, you'll be capturing only 1 color information instead of 3. Okay, so which is what is being shown here. Right, so you can see this is a typical color filter array known as a Bayer. Okay, Bayer color filter array is one of the most common one. Okay, so at first glance, you'll notice that this color distribution is a little bit uneven, right? What do you notice? For this Bayer color filter array, what do you notice? Right, if in terms of symmetry, it looks a little bit strange, right? Because they're RGB. In this case, what do you notice? You have more green, right? So why is that more green color filter in a CFA? I hope you're not just reading off the sentence on top. Okay, but the answer is actually right, because our eyes are actually more sensitive to the brightness component than the color component. Okay? So our eyes is more sensitive to the luminance component than the chrominance component. As it turned out that the luminance component is more aligned with the green color. So in other words, our eyes are more sensitive to the green component than the blue or the red. That's why when you have this color filter array, you try to have more green filter rather than the red or the blue filter. So what happens now is that when you have this color filter array, right? So when the image comes in, right, the red filter here will only allow the red color, the red channel of the information to go through. Okay. For the green filter, right, it will only allow the green component of the light signal to go through. And likewise for a blue filter, only the blue component of light to filter. So you can see that, therefore, if you have an image like this, okay, an image sensor like this, right, this pixel will be capturing what? Suppose you have an image right? You let it go through CFA, and then you have the image sensor now. So assuming that if you have an image sensor here, at this location here, what color of the information will it capture? At this location, it will be capturing green, right? All right, at this location, it will be capturing the red. At this location, it will be capturing the, where's the, sorry, this red, this one is blue. So what happened now is that, in short, right, okay, your, this light come in, it pass through a CFA, right, and then this image sensor, you have a mosaic of different information. One pixel you capture is green channel, the other pixel you capture the blue channel, the next one is the red channel, the next one is the green. So you have a mix of this information, it's like the mosaic. So now what you need to do is, right, okay, I'm going to just go through this slide and then I'll stop. Okay, therefore you can see, when you let the light go through a CFA, what happens is that it ends up that for each of the pixels that you have here, you only capture one color information, either red, green, or blue. So for real image, you need to have 3 channels. So therefore, you still need to have a task of trying to reconstruct from this particular sample image, okay, or mosaic image to this full 3-channel information. So the process of trying to estimate these 3 full channels of color information from some samples is known as CFA demosaicing. Okay, CFA demosaicing. So it says that CFA demosaicing is a process to restore a full color image, okay, with 3 channels from each CFA sample. So you can see that at each pixel in this case here, 2 missing colors need to be estimated, right? So for example, in this pixel location, what are the colors that need to be estimated? In this location, what are the colors that need to be estimated? Green and blue, huh? So you need to estimate green, blue and red here. How about this one? You have already captured the red information, so you still need to estimate the missing green and blue, huh? So by now you can see this estimating process will allow you to reconstruct, okay, the full color image. Okay, so there's many different ways you can try to estimate so-called the missing pixels. Okay, some easier, some more sophisticated. If you go for easier one, things such as you can use bilinear interpolation, but the result may not be so good as compared to some more sophisticated technique. Okay, I think, yeah, I'll just stop here. Right, I'll see you tomorrow.